Sarah Martinez had always been invisible in the crowded Naval Communications Center. At 24, she was just another junior officer among hundreds. Her uniform perfectly pressed but unremarkable. Her voice steady but rarely noticed above the constant hum of radio chatter and computer keyboards. She had joined the Navy 3 years ago with dreams of making a difference, but most days felt like she was just another cog in a massive machine that barely acknowledged her existence. The morning of October 5th 10th started like any other. Sarah arrived at the Norfolk Naval Base Communications Facility at 0600 hours, her coffee mug in hand and her mind already focused on the day's routine tasks. The building buzzed with its usual energy, dozens of sailors monitoring frequencies, tracking ship movements and relaying messages across the Atlantic. Sarah's station was tucked away in a corner, where she monitored emergency frequencies and handled routine administrative communications. She had developed a precise morning routine over the years. First, she would check her equipment, ensuring all frequencies were clear and her radio systems were functioning properly. Then she would review overnight reports, looking for any unusual activity or messages that required follow-up. Finally, she would settle in with her coffee and begin the day's monitoring duties. It was methodical, predictable work that suited her careful nature. Sarah came from a small town in Ohio where her father had worked in a steel mill for 30 years. Her mother was a schoolteacher who had always encouraged her to dream bigger than their industrial hometown could offer. When Sarah announced her intention to join the Navy, her parents were both proud and worried. They understood her desire to serve her country, but they also knew how challenging it could be for a young woman to find her place in a military environment. During her training, Sarah had excelled in communications technology. She had a natural ear for radio signals and could distinguish between different types of transmissions with remarkable accuracy. Her instructors had noted her attention to detail and her ability to remain calm under pressure. However, in the 3 years since her assignment to Norfolk, she had never been tested in a real crisis situation. She sometimes wondered if she would measure up when it truly mattered. The communications center was a massive room filled with banks of radio equipment, computer monitors, and satellite communication systems. The walls were lined with maps showing shipping lanes, naval positions, and weather patterns. The constant background noise created a strange kind of music. The static of radio frequencies, the clicking of keyboards, and the quiet conversations of sailors coordinating operations across the globe. Sarah's supervisor, Commander Johnson, was a veteran of 20 years who ran the facility with military precision. He was fair but demanding, expecting every sailor under his command to maintain the highest standards of professionalism. Sarah respected him, though she sometimes felt he saw her as just another reliable but unremarkable member of his team. She had never given him reason to think otherwise. On this particular morning, Sarah noticed an unusual amount of activity in the center. Senior officers were moving between stations more frequently than usual, and there seemed to be an undercurrent of tension that she couldn't quite identify. When she asked her colleague at the next station about it, he just shrugged and said there had been some unusual radio traffic overnight, but nothing specific had been announced. Sarah poured her second cup of coffee around 0800 hours, standing near the small break area that overlooked the main floor of the communications center. From this vantage point, she could see the entire operation, dozens of sailors bent over their equipment, officers reviewing reports, and the large status boards that displayed current operations. It was a view she had seen thousands of times before, but today something felt different. The coffee was particularly strong that morning, the kind of military brew that could wake the dead. Sarah added her usual splash of cream and stood for a moment watching the organized chaos below. She had no way of knowing that in the next few minutes her entire career would change forever. The routine morning she had planned was about to become anything but ordinary, and the skills she had been quietly developing for 3 years were about to be put to the ultimate test. The voice came through the main speakers with crystal clarity, cutting through the morning chatter like a knife through silence. It was deep, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Sarah was halfway through bringing her coffee cup to her lips when the words stopped her cold. "This is Admiral Richardson calling for Radio Sierra Mike 774. Immediate response required. Critical priority." Sarah's coffee cup froze inches from her mouth. Sierra Mike 774 was her personal call sign, assigned to her 3 years ago during her initial training. It was a combination that identified her specifically among the thousands of naval personnel with communication responsibilities. She had used it countless times for routine transmissions, but she had never, ever heard it called by someone of the Admiral's rank. The entire communications center seemed to hold its breath. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every keyboard fell silent. The usual background hum of equipment continued, but the human sounds that normally filled the space vanished completely. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as she looked around the room, wondering if she had somehow misheard. Admiral Richardson was a legend in the Navy, a 4-star admiral with over 30 years of service. He was currently serving as the commander of Naval Operations Pacific Fleet. Sarah had seen his photograph on official communications and knew his reputation for strategic brilliance and unwavering dedication to his sailors. But she had never imagined she would ever have direct contact with someone of his stature. Commander Johnson appeared at her elbow so quickly that Sarah wondered if he had been watching her station all morning. His face was a mixture of confusion and concern as he gestured toward her radio equipment. "Martinez, did he just call your sign?" His voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might somehow make the impossible situation even more surreal. Sarah nodded slowly, unable to find her voice. Around them, she could see other sailors turning in their chairs, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright amazement. In her peripheral vision, she noticed senior officers emerging from their offices, drawn by the unusual silence that had fallen over the normally bustling facility. The Admiral's voice came through the speakers again, more insistent this time. "Radio Sierra, Mike 774, this is Admiral Richardson. Time is critical. Please respond immediately on secure frequency, Charlie 7. Sarah's hands were trembling as she set down her coffee cup and moved toward her station. 3 years of training kicked in, overriding her shock and confusion. Whatever was happening, whatever had caused a 4-star admiral to personally call her sign, she knew she had to respond professionally and quickly. The word critical in military communications was not used lightly. Commander Johnson followed her to her station, along with several other senior staff members. Sarah was acutely aware of the growing audience as she adjusted her headset and reached for the radio controls. Her training had prepared her for many situations, but nothing had prepared her for the sensation of having the entire communications center watching her every move. "Secure frequency Charlie 7, she repeated to herself, her fingers automatically adjusting the radio to the encrypted channel used for sensitive communications. This frequency was typically reserved for operational matters that required the highest levels of security. Sarah had monitored it before, but she had never been directly involved in a transmission at this level. As she prepared to respond, Sarah's mind raced through possible explanations. Had she made a mistake in a previous transmission? Was there some kind of emergency involving her family? Had she somehow been selected for a special assignment? None of the possibilities seemed likely. Given her junior rank and routine duties, the silence in the room was becoming oppressive. Sarah could feel the weight of expectation from everyone around her. Commander Johnson was standing close enough that she could hear his breathing, and she could sense other personnel gathering behind them. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear that it was unprecedented in the experience of everyone present. Sarah took a deep breath and keyed her microphone. Military protocol demanded a formal response, regardless of her confusion about the situation. She had been trained to respond promptly and professionally to any communication, whether from a fellow seaman or the highest-ranking officers in the Navy. "Admiral Richardson. This is Radio Sierra Mike 774 responding on secure Charlie 7. I read you loud and clear?" "Sir." Her voice was steadier than she had expected, though her heart was still racing. She could hardly believe she was actually speaking directly to one of the most senior officers in the United States Navy. The response came immediately, and Admiral Richardson's tone carried an urgency that made Sarah's stomach tighten with anxiety. "Sierra Mike 774, I need you to listen very carefully. We have a situation developing in the South China Sea that requires your specific expertise. Are you prepared to receive classified operational information?" Sarah's world seemed to tilt on its axis as the Admiral's words sank in. Classified operational information meant this was no routine communication error or administrative mix-up. This was real, urgent, and somehow connected to her specific skills. She glanced at Commander Johnson, who nodded grimly and immediately began clearing the area around her station of anyone without appropriate security clearance. "Sir, I am prepared to receive classified information," Sarah responded, her voice gaining strength as her professional training overrode her personal shock. Around her, she could hear the quiet shuffle of personnel being relocated, and she noticed security officers taking positions near the exits. Whatever was happening, it was being treated with the highest level of seriousness. Admiral Richardson's voice came through with stark clarity. "Sierra Mike 774. We have lost contact with submarine USS Helena approximately 1,800 miles west of Guam. Last transmission was a coded emergency signal that our standard communications specialists have been unable to decode. Intelligence suggests they may be using an improvised code system based on classical music references." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. During her training, she had written a detailed thesis on unconventional coding methods, including one section that explored how musical knowledge could be used to create emergency communication protocols. It had been an academic exercise, something she had pursued out of personal interest rather than any official requirement. She had never imagined it might have real-world applications. The Admiral continued without pause. "Your personnel file indicates extensive musical training and a research project on music-based coding systems. We need you to analyze the Helena's last transmission and determine if your theory might help us decode their message. Lives may be at stake, and you may be our only option for re-establishing communication." Sarah's mind raced back to her childhood piano lessons, her high school involvement in the marching band, and the music theory courses she had taken during her brief time at college before joining the Navy. Her thesis had explored how familiar musical patterns could be used to create codes that would be nearly impossible for enemies to crack, but could be understood by someone with the right musical background. Commander Johnson had moved to a nearby terminal and was already pulling up Sarah's service record and academic files. His expression showed a mixture of surprise and growing respect as he reviewed information he had apparently never noticed before. "Martinez, I had no idea about your musical background," he said quietly. "This explains why Admiral Richardson specifically requested you." The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. Sarah had spent 3 years handling routine communications, and now she was being asked to potentially save the lives of an entire submarine crew. The USS Helena carried more than 100 sailors, and if they were in distress in hostile waters, every minute could be critical to their survival. "Sir, I will need access to the transmission and any background information about the Helena's current mission status," Sarah replied, her training helping her focus on the practical requirements rather than the magnitude of the situation. She could feel her hands steadying as she shifted into problem-solving mode. Admiral Richardson's response was immediate. "All necessary files are being transmitted to your station now. Additionally, we are patching in Dr. Elizabeth Chun, a musicologist from the Naval War College, who may be able to provide additional expertise. You will have full support and unlimited resources, but we need results as quickly as possible." Sarah's computer screen began displaying incoming data streams, technical specifications for the Helena, details of their last known position, and most importantly, the audio file of their final transmission. She could see other officers gathering around workstations throughout the center, and she realized that this operation was now involving personnel far beyond her small corner of the facility. As she put on her headphones, to listen to the Helena's transmission? Sarah thought about the strange path that had brought her to this moment. Her small-town upbringing, her musical education, her decision to join the Navy, and her academic research had all somehow aligned to make her uniquely qualified for this critical task. She had often wondered if her diverse interests would ever prove useful in her military career. And now she was about to find out. The transmission from the Helena was brief, lasting only 37 seconds. To most listeners, it would have sounded like random electronic noise mixed with what might have been interference or equipment malfunction. But as Sarah listened, she began to detect subtle patterns that reminded her of the musical coding concepts she had studied. There were rhythm variations that might represent different notes, and frequency changes that could correspond to musical intervals. Dr. Chun's voice came through on a conference line, her expertise immediately apparent as she began discussing the mathematical relationships between musical scales and communication protocols. Sarah found herself in the surreal position of collaborating with a professor she had only read about in academic journals, working to solve a puzzle that could mean the difference between life and death for 100 Navy personnel. Time seemed to compress as Sarah began her analysis, knowing that somewhere in the vast Pacific Ocean, the crew of the USS Helena was depending on her ability to unlock their desperate message. Sarah played the transmission 17 times, each repetition revealing new layers of complexity that both frustrated and encouraged her. Dr. Chun had suggested they start with basic musical interval patterns, but Sarah's instincts told her the code was more sophisticated than simple note-to-letter substitution. She could hear something familiar in the rhythm patterns, something that tugged at a memory from her college music theory classes. "It's not just about individual notes," Sarah said into the conference line, her voice growing more confident as her analysis deepened. "I think they're using chord progressions, possibly based on a common classical piece that any musician would recognize. The timing variations might represent different harmonic relationships." Admiral Richardson's voice cut through the discussion with military precision. "How long will you need to decode this, Sierra Mike 774? We're receiving reports of hostile naval activity in the Helena's last known area, and our window for rescue operations is closing rapidly." The pressure was immense, but Sarah found herself thinking more clearly than she ever had before. She had spent years analyzing communication patterns, and now she was applying those skills to a puzzle that combined her professional expertise with her musical background. It was as if her entire career had been preparing her for this exact moment. "Sir, give me 30 minutes, Sarah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "I think I know what musical foundation they're using, but I need time to map the harmonic relationships to potential message content." She muted her microphone and turned to Commander Johnson, who had been watching her work with growing amazement. "Sir, I need access to a piano keyboard or music software. If I'm right about this, I need to hear the chord progressions properly to understand how they correspond to the message." Within 10 minutes, a portable electronic keyboard had been brought to her station, along with music analysis software that she had never seen before, but that seemed to have been specially developed for exactly this type of cryptographic work. Sarah realized that her theoretical research had apparently been taken much more seriously by Navy intelligence than she had ever known. As she began translating the transmissions, rhythm patterns into musical notation, a clear melody began to emerge. It was based on Pachelbel's Canon in D, a piece so well known among musicians that it would be instantly recognizable to anyone with classical training. The Helena's communications officer had been brilliant in choosing this foundation. It was complex enough to create a sophisticated code, but familiar enough that a trained musician could identify it, even through electronic interference. Sarah's fingers moved across the keyboard as she played out the variations she was hearing in the transmission. Each chord change seemed to correspond to different groups of letters, and the timing between chords appeared to indicate word breaks. Dr. Chun was providing running commentary on the harmonic theory, but Sarah found herself working more from intuition than academic analysis. "I've got something," Sarah announced, her excitement barely contained. "The message is definitely based on Pachelbel's canon, but they're using harmonic substitutions to represent different letters. The major chords are vowels, minor chords are consonants, and the timing variations indicate punctuation and word spacing." She began writing the decoded message on a whiteboard that had been wheeled to her station. The first words that emerged were "reactor emergency," and the room fell into complete silence as the implications became clear. The Helena wasn't just lost or experiencing communication difficulties, they were dealing with a potentially catastrophic situation that could threaten the lives of everyone aboard. The complete message revealed the submarine's desperate situation. They had experienced a reactor coolant leak that had damaged their main communication systems. They were running on emergency power and had been forced to surface in hostile waters. Their position was approximately 50 miles from their last known coordinates, and they needed immediate assistance before their situation became critical. Admiral Richardson's response was immediate and decisive. "Excellent work, Sierra Mike 774. We now have a clear picture of the Helena's status and location. Rescue operations are already being coordinated based on your decoded intelligence. You may have just saved 100 lives." Sarah sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just transpired. Less than 2 hours ago, she had been pouring coffee and preparing for another routine day. Now she had personally decoded a message that would enable a submarine rescue operation in one of the most dangerous regions of the Pacific Ocean. Commander Johnson placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression showing a level of respect that was entirely new in their professional relationship. "Martinez, I've been running this facility for 8 years, and I've never seen anything like what just happened here. You've demonstrated skills that most of us didn't even know existed." But even as the immediate crisis was being addressed, Sarah could see that Admiral Richardson wasn't finished with her. The tone in his voice suggested that this successful decoding operation was just the beginning of something much larger. The Navy had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of proof that musical cryptography could be a viable tool for emergency communications. "Sierra Mike 774, remain on this frequency. We have additional matters to discuss once the Helena situation is fully resolved," the Admiral instructed. "Your performance today has opened up possibilities that we need to explore immediately." Sarah nodded, knowing that her career had just taken a dramatic turn that she could never have anticipated when she woke up that morning. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself in Admiral Richardson's private conference room, accessed through a secure video connection. That made her feel like she was sitting across from one of the most powerful people in the Navy. The Helena had been successfully located and was already being escorted to safety by 2 destroyer escorts, their reactor situation stabilized by emergency engineering teams who had been airlifted to their location. "Petty Officer Martinez," the Admiral began, his tone now more conversational but no less serious, "what happened today has confirmed something that Navy intelligence has been theorizing about for the past 2 years. Your thesis on musical cryptography wasn't just an interesting academic exercise. It represents a breakthrough in secure communication that could revolutionize how we handle emergency situations." Sarah listened in amazement as Admiral Richardson explained that a small team of intelligence analysts had been quietly developing practical applications for musical coding systems based on her original research. They had been waiting for the right situation to test the theory, and the Helena's emergency had provided that opportunity. The submarine's communications officer had actually been trained in basic musical cryptography as part of a pilot program. "Sir, I had no idea that my research was being taken seriously at such a high level," Sarah admitted. "I wrote that thesis because I was genuinely interested in the intersection between music and communication, but I never imagined it would have real operational value." The Admiral smiled. The first time Sarah had seen any warmth in his expression during their communication. The best innovations often come from people who are pursuing knowledge out of genuine curiosity rather than trying to meet specific operational requirements. Your approach to the problem was exactly what we needed, someone who understood both the technical aspects of communication and the creative possibilities of musical structure. What Admiral Richardson revealed next took Sarah's breath away. The Navy wanted to establish a new specialized unit focused on unconventional cryptography, with musical coding as just one of several innovative approaches they planned to develop. They were offering her the opportunity to lead the research team, which would involve working with musicians, mathematicians, and communication specialists from across the military. This assignment would mean promotion to lieutenant, immediate transfer to Naval Intelligence Headquarters, and the chance to build something entirely new, the Admiral explained. You would have access to resources and support that most officers never see in their entire careers. But I need to know if you're prepared for the responsibility and the security clearances that would be required. Sarah's mind raced as she considered the implications. This opportunity was beyond anything she had ever imagined for her career, but it also meant leaving behind everything familiar and entering a world of classified projects and high-stakes operations. The events of the morning had shown her that she was capable of performing under extreme pressure, but leading an entire research unit would be an entirely different challenge. Sir, I appreciate the confidence you're showing in my abilities, Sarah replied carefully. But I have to ask, why me? Surely there are more experienced officers with advanced degrees and specialized training who would be better qualified to lead this kind of program. Admiral Richardson's response revealed the depth of research that had gone into this decision. Martinez, we've been monitoring your work for the past 18 months. Your routine communications handling has been exemplary, but more importantly, you've shown consistent creativity in solving technical problems that other personnel struggled with. Your supervisors have noted your ability to find unconventional solutions to communication challenges. He continued, explaining that the Navy needed someone who could think beyond traditional military approaches to cryptography. The musical coding success was just one example of the innovative thinking they needed to stay ahead of increasingly sophisticated enemy intelligence capabilities. Traditional codes were becoming easier to break with advanced computer systems, but creative approaches based on cultural knowledge like music could provide security advantages that pure mathematics couldn't match. Sarah thought about her small hometown in Ohio and how proud her parents would be to know that their daughter was being personally recruited by a 4-star admiral. She also thought about the Helena's crew, who were now safe partly because of skills she had developed as a hobby rather than through formal military training. The opportunity to potentially save more lives in the future was incredibly compelling. Admiral, I accept the assignment, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the decision. I'm ready to take on this responsibility and build the kind of program you're describing. The Admiral's satisfaction was evident in his response. Outstanding, Lieutenant Martinez. Your promotion is effective immediately, and your transfer orders will be processed within 48 hours. You'll be briefed on the full scope of the project when you arrive at headquarters, but I can tell you that this morning's success has already generated interest at the highest levels of the Pentagon. As the secure connection ended, Sarah sat back in her chair and tried to process everything that had happened. In the span of a few hours, she had gone from being an invisible junior officer to leading a classified research program that could change how the Navy approached secure communications. The morning had started with her pouring coffee in a routine communication center, and now she was being trusted with responsibilities that could affect national security. Commander Johnson appeared in the doorway, his expression showing a mixture of pride and amazement. Lieutenant Martinez, I've just received your transfer orders. I have to say, in 20 years of military service, I've never seen anyone's career change so dramatically in a single day. You've made all of us proud. Sarah realized that this was just the beginning of a journey she couldn't have imagined when she first enlisted in the Navy. 6 months later, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stood in front of a room filled with some of the brightest minds in the military. Presenting the quarterly report on her musical cryptography research unit, the small team she had assembled included a former symphony conductor who had served as an Army intelligence officer, a mathematician who specialized in harmonic analysis, and a computer scientist who had developed algorithms for converting musical patterns into secure communication protocols. Their success had exceeded everyone's expectations. The Helena rescue had been just the beginning. They had developed 17 different musical coding systems based on various musical traditions from around the world. These systems had been successfully deployed in 12 emergency situations, saving lives and protecting sensitive operations in regions where traditional communication methods had been compromised. Sarah's presentation included case studies that would have seemed like fiction just a year earlier. Her team had helped establish secure communications with special forces, units operating in hostile territory by using traditional folk songs as coding foundations. They had developed emergency protocols for pilots that used rhythm patterns based on jazz improvisation. Most remarkably, they had created an entire diplomatic communication system based on classical music that had proven virtually impossible for enemy intelligence services to crack. Admiral Richardson sat in the front row, his expression showing the quiet satisfaction of someone whose judgment had been thoroughly validated. The initial investment in Sarah's unconventional approach had paid dividends that extended far beyond the original scope of the project. Other branches of the military were now requesting similar programs, and international allies were asking for training in musical cryptography techniques. The key to our success has been recognizing that effective cryptography doesn't always come from mathematical complexity, Sarah explained to the assembled officers. Sometimes the best security comes from using cultural knowledge that enemies don't possess or can't easily replicate. Music is a universal human language, but the specific musical traditions that people know deeply are often tied to their cultural background and personal experiences. During the question period, a general from the Army asked about the practical limitations of musical cryptography. Sarah's response demonstrated how much her thinking had evolved since that morning when she first heard her call sign over the communications center speakers. Sir, musical cryptography isn't intended to replace traditional methods, but rather to provide additional options when conventional approaches fail or when cultural factors give us specific advantages. The Helena situation was perfect for our techniques because their communications officer had musical training and could implement our protocols under extreme stress. We found that the human element, the cultural knowledge, and creative thinking often provide security that pure technology cannot match. After the presentation, Sarah found herself walking through the Pentagon corridors with Admiral Richardson, discussing the future of the program. The success had brought opportunities she was still learning to navigate, including requests from intelligence agencies and even some civilian applications that could benefit from their research. Martinez, when I first called your sign that morning, I was taking a calculated risk based on limited information, the Admiral reflected. We knew you had the technical skills and the musical background, but we couldn't predict how you would perform under pressure, or whether your academic theories would translate into practical solutions. Sarah smiled, remembering the terror and excitement she had felt when she first heard her call sign echoing through the communications center. Sir, I'm still amazed that everything came together the way it did. If the Helena's communications officer hadn't known enough about music to implement the coding, or if I hadn't been able to recognize the Pachelbel Foundation, the entire operation could have failed. Admiral Richardson stopped walking and turned to face her directly. That's exactly the point, Lieutenant. Military success often depends on having the right person with the right combination of skills available at the critical moment. Your background prepared you for an opportunity that no one could have predicted, and you were ready when the moment came. As they continued their walk, Sarah thought about how dramatically her life had changed since that ordinary morning when she was pouring coffee in Norfolk. She had gone from feeling invisible and unremarkable to leading a program that was changing how the Navy thought about communication security. the small-town girl from Ohio who had joined the military hoping to make a difference, had found a way to use her diverse interests and academic curiosity to save lives and protect national security. The program's success had brought recognition that still felt surreal to Sarah. She had been awarded the Navy Commendation Medal for her role in the Helena rescue, and her research team had received funding for expanded operations that would include partnerships with universities and civilian research institutions. The morning that had started with routine duties had led to a career path she never could have imagined. Most importantly, Sarah had learned that the skills and knowledge that make someone unique are often the same qualities that can make them invaluable when the right situation arises. Her musical background hadn't seemed particularly relevant to naval communications until the moment when it became the key to saving lives. The lesson was one that had implications far beyond military service. Being prepared means developing all of your abilities, even when you can't see how they might be useful. As she returned to her office to continue working on the next phase of the musical cryptography program, Sarah reflected on the simple truth that had emerged from her extraordinary experience. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives begin when we're just pouring coffee, completely unaware that everything is about to change.